You're listening to the Nourish Child Podcast, episode number 31, Food Rewards for Kids. Should you give your child a reward for eating broccoli or another vegetable? Should you give your child a food reward for good behavior? These are the questions that parents grapple with every day. Today we're talking about how food rewards may shape your child's food preferences and their eating. And we'll also talk about what you can do to help your children learn to like and eat healthy, nutritious foods like vegetables. I'm Jill Castle, registered dietitian, child nutrition expert, and host of the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of raising healthy kids inside and out. You can find today's show notes with all the links I mention over at jillcastle.com/031. That's 031 for episode number 31.
Welcome to the Nourish Child Podcast, a show about childhood nutrition, feeding kids, and dealing with the ups and downs of growing a healthy child. Here's your host, registered dietitian and childhood nutrition expert, Jill Castle.
Hey there, Jill here. Welcome back to the Nourish Child Podcast. Glad you're here. If it's your first time here, thanks for tuning in and giving this show a try. Today we're talking about food rewards for kids, and it can be quite a little touchy subject. I think it's pretty natural for all of us to, as parents, to want our children to eat healthy, and sometimes we use things to incentivize our children to eat well. For example, we might offer dessert if our child takes another bite of broccoli or eats all his green beans or even cleans his plate. And I can tell you, using a reward such as dessert is highly motivating to most children. It's a quick, short-term strategy to get kids to eat what we want them to eat, but it's not always necessarily the best approach. Sometimes we use food rewards to get children to behave well, and that also may not be the best approach. So we're going to get into that today, as I want you to have a good sense of what food rewards may do and how they might play a role in changing your child's food preferences and even their relationship with food. Before we get started, though, I want to share a couple of announcements. I do have Food Parenting Pro open for registration. This is a 4-week live seminar series for nutrition professionals to learn more about food parenting, specifically feeding styles and feeding practices, setting up structure and boundaries, using reasonable choice, and helping children develop autonomy around food choices and eating. So this is a live 4-week recurring seminar throughout the month of June. Registration is open now and will be closing on June 1st, and the course actually starts on June 6th, I believe. I believe it's the 6th. Offered in the afternoon, Eastern Standard Time between 3 and 5. So if you are interested, please sign up. There is a limited registration number. I can only have up to 50 people, and the course is filling up, so make sure you get your registration in. I also have a work with me option for parents this summer. So if you're a parent who is striving to feed your child healthfully and have a good, wholesome, balanced lifestyle and structure over the summer, but you feel like you might be getting behind with that, or that your child might not be heading down the right path when it comes to balanced eating and exercising and good sleep and just healthy living, let's get on top of that. During the month of June, you can work with me for 5 weeks actually, and I will, as a group, coach you along and specifically address your concerns and worries and help you with some strategies to help your child have a healthy summer. So again, registration for that is open until June 1st. And if you get my newsletter, you will have received the link to sign up for that. And if you don't, just shoot me an email, jill@jillcastle.com, and I'll send you the information. Food rewards, or rewarding with food, is a feeding practice that is considered to be a controlling feeding practice. It's a way to get children to do what we want them to do when it comes to food choices and when it comes to their eating. So today we're talking about food rewards, or rewarding kids for eating a certain amount or eating a certain type of food. How we get them to do that with food rewards is what we're talking about today. So what is a food reward? For example, candy. Candy's a food reward. I remember when I was younger, my mother going to the bank, and we always loved to go to the bank because when we did, we got a sucker. And it was always the case. And my mother used the drive-through at the bank, and we still got a sucker, and we always looked forward to it. And it was always attached to being quiet while my mother was doing her bank transactions through the car window. So she didn't want a lot of chaos and talking and rambunctiousness from us in the back seat. So we were promised a sucker if we behaved well. We see this all the time in other scenarios. You might take your child to the doctor and receive some sort of a treat. I see more and more these days that it's less of a food reward and more of a non-food reward, like a sticker, for example. But you might take your child to the dentist and also see some sort of a food treat for children who are going through a dental cleaning or a cavity filling or anything like that, which is quite ironic, but we do still see that. But food rewards are basically any kind of food, but in our culture, and when it comes to children, it tends to be sweets, treats, desserts that we use as parents to help our children eat a certain amount of food or eat a certain type of food. And oftentimes we see this with vegetables. So, for example, a parent might say, "Hey, Johnny, if you eat your broccoli tonight, you can have dessert." Or a parent might say, "Hey, Susie, if you eat all your dinner, you can have ice cream." That's what we're talking about in terms of a food reward. Food rewards are effective. They, more times than not, result in a short-term behavior change. And oftentimes it's immediate. "Yeah, I'll eat that broccoli, Mom. I want some ice cream." "Sure, I'll eat everything on my plate, Dad. I want some cake for dessert." So oftentimes food rewards are tempting to use because we see an immediate change in our child's behavior. We see them do exactly what we want them to do. So, but what does the research say about using food as a reward? So some of the research is definitely telling us that it's not a good thing to do. For example, using palatable foods. When they say palatable foods, we're talking about high sugar, high fat, even salty types of foods. So they are really pleasing to the palate. They're palatable. So using palatable foods as a reward can make them more appealing. So not only when we use something like ice cream or candy, that's obviously a sweet, Not only do kids already like those in most cases, they can become even more appealing if they're used as a food reward. On the other hand, if we use healthy food or nutritious food like broccoli or green beans or any other type of nutritious food as a punishment, so when I say as a punishment, it's more of like a downside. I'm trying to get my child to eat broccoli, and if he doesn't eat it, then he doesn't get a food reward. We know in that case scenario, so using, again, a dessert to reward eating broccoli, which in a child's mind might be something that they don't like, and so therefore that can be seen as a punishment to them. We know that the research tells us that children may like that healthier food less as a result, especially when it's attached to a food reward. Furthermore, if children see food as a reward, they may seek rewards when they become an adult. So there's some research that suggests that adults who seek food rewards as adults may have been rewarded with food as a child to control their behavior. When we talk about adults seeking food rewards, I'm talking more like, hey, I lost 10 pounds, I'm going to go have dessert. Or I aced my exam, I deserve a pint of Ben & Jerry's. Or I got a promotion today, let's go celebrate. And at the end of the meal, of course I'm having a huge dessert because I got a promotion. One study that was conducted in 2003 showed that adults who as kids could recall food rewards that were used to control their behavior were more likely to diet or control their own eating and binge eat later. So that was a study that doesn't show cause and effect. It shows an association, but it certainly makes us think about the use of food rewards and how it can have a long-term impact on how we even view food. So basically, this study is saying if as children we're rewarding our children with food to get them to eat a certain way or control their behavior, make them, good kids, that we might be setting them up in the future to control their own eating or even diet, and then in turn binge eat later. So that whole relationship with food can get a little bit altered, perhaps, when we're using desserts and candy and things of that nature to incentivize eating certain types of foods or certain amounts of foods. I talk about the development of a healthy relationship with food when I interviewed Julie Duffy Dillon on the podcast. And I will link to that episode in the show notes if you want to go back and listen to that. It's very interesting, the way we feed our children. And we talked about this also when we talked about restriction or food restriction. These little actions that we do as parents can really have a long-term impact on our children's relationship with food, how they view it, and then in turn, how they manage it in their adult lives. So I'll link to that episode as well in the show notes. So what do we know about what the use of food rewards really do? Like, what does the research tell us? And I think it's always important to go and look at the research and get a sense of what it's telling us. So we're not just relying on our gut instinct, oh, this is good to do or this is bad to do, but what is really the objective research telling us? And there are a few things that are going on, it appears. For one, we might be encouraging children to overeat when we use food rewards. And so here's how that plays out. let's say that a child is sitting down for dinner and he has a portion of quinoa on his plate or a portion of vegetables on his plate. And he doesn't like that food, but it's on his plate and his parents have said, you need to eat that and we don't want you to leave the table until you do. But to encourage you to eat it, we'll offer you some chocolate chip cookies after dinner for dessert. So perhaps the child is sitting there and not eating the quinoa or the vegetable because he doesn't like it, or perhaps he's sitting there and not eating it because he's not hungry any longer. Incentivizing a child with a food reward, in this case scenario, might cause that child to overconsume, or to overeat. Because think about it, if you're not hungry, you've finished your meal, you're not interested anymore because you don't have those hunger signals anymore, you're satisfied. But here, your parents are offering you this lovely dessert which you love and you can't resist. So you say, okay, I'll eat more than I'm hungry for just so I can have that dessert. So you can see how that can play out a little bit. The child decides to overeat, eats beyond his appetite in order to have that food reward. So that's one thing that the research tells us could happen with a child, that we encourage them by using food rewards to overeat beyond their appetite. Another thing that food rewards can do is contribute to an imbalanced diet. So this makes sense. If you're using dessert type foods or candy or other sweet-based foods as an incentive to get your child to eat more or eat something that you want them to eat, you might be erring on the side of using too many sweets during the day or during the week or during the month to incentivize your child. And that can lead to a diet that is out of balance. Out of balance meaning more unhealthy or low nutrition foods than healthier fare. And we know that when children have too many sweets in their diet and too many less than nutritious foods in their diet, the balance can get off. And when the balance gets off, that can compromise their overall health. And it can certainly set up patterns for food intake later in life as well. Additionally, when we use food rewards, we might be setting our children up for poor eating habits. So in general, that can mean that they're overeating. It can mean that they're making poor food choices. It can mean that they are just in general gravitating to unhealthy eating habits over healthier eating habits. We also know that research tells us that children who experience the use of food rewards learn to like those food rewards a lot. In fact, they can even learn to prefer those food rewards. So we could be teaching them a preference for sweets as opposed to teaching them a preference for more nutritious foods. We also contradict our messages to our children about eating healthfully and nutritiously. If we are, on one hand, asking them to, try their vegetables or eat their vegetables or eat their whole grains or their protein foods at the dinner table, and we're then turning around and offering them a treat to do so, it's contradictory. Here, eat healthy food, but let me give you something that's not so nutritious so that you do it. It just sets up this whole contradiction around food. So, if you've been listening to this show for a while, I am a big fan of desserts without strings attached, meaning if you decide you're serving dessert after dinner on Wednesday night, everybody gets a fair shake at dessert on dinner on Wednesday night. It's not just the kids who eat all their meal or just the kids who eat all their vegetables. If you decide dinner's part of the meal, dinner's part of the meal for everyone, regardless of how or what they eat. A recent study out of Birmingham, 2016 study, looked at 3 to 5-year-olds and then measured them again at 5 to 7-year-olds. And these 3 to 5-year-olds had experienced use of food as reward in conjunction with overt control of their food intake. And what they found when the researchers remeasured these kids later on, between 5 and 7 years, they found that they were more likely to be emotional eaters. So there's a whole psychological sequela from using food as rewards as well. Other research tells us that if your child already likes broccoli, for example, or another healthy food that you're trying to get them to eat, you can actually reverse their liking of those healthier foods by using food rewards, because their perception of those foods that they already liked could be changed. And it sort of is like, hey, if mom or dad is giving me dessert for eating something I already like, something must be wrong with that food. So we want children to experience all kinds of foods, and we want them to be motivated to eat those foods on their own over time without any kind of reward or incentive. But it's really hard to get children to like a variety of food. And it's, the long-term goal, obviously, is to raise children who like a variety of different foods from all the different food groups and who are willing to try and taste and eat those foods over time. But we know how kids can be, and tasting food is something that needs to be in place, oftentimes long before a child decides they're going to like the food. So a child mostly is not going to sit at a table and watch squash get passed around the table, smell it and look at it, and decide all of a sudden they like it. It doesn't work that way. They have to taste it. And in order to taste it, in order to like it, they have to taste it. So there's these steps that go along the way. The first step is obviously exposing, liking, looking at it, smelling it, interacting with the food is definitely a step in the right direction. But in order to encourage children to like a variety of food, they need to taste it. So there is some evidence that suggests that children can be helped along in the process of liking a variety of different foods when we use non-food rewards. So non-food rewards like stickers, or more book time before bed, or extra TV time, or staying up later, or having a friend over at the end of the week. These are all rewards that can be used that are not related to food. And these types of non-food rewards might help children taste food. Stickers, for example, or verbal praise and as long as that verbal praise isn't pressure, but verbal praise and stickers, some studies are showing can motivate trying a new food. And trying means tasting in this situation. When children taste food, they have a shot at liking it. They might not like it the first time, but they are closer to even having a chance at liking a food once they've put it on their tongue. Now, tasting is not chewing and swallowing. I often talk to my clients about that. Tasting can be, putting a food on your child's lips and letting them lick it to have a taste that way. It could be putting it in the mouth and then spitting it out. So tasting is not necessarily eating, chewing and swallowing, but tasting can certainly be a step closer to learning to like a food. In school, sometimes children are given food rewards for academic achievement or for good behavior. I remember one of my kids had a teacher that gave out candy at the end of the day to every child who had good behavior. So this was a routine thing. Every child in the classroom who had good behavior for the day got a piece of candy. And I just think it's really important to understand the long-term repercussions of using food as a reward for children. It can really change their relationship with food. It can change their food preferences, and it can detract them from tuning in to eating for enjoyment and eating for flavor preferences and eating for hunger even, and can change that to having them be purely motivated to eat a food in order to get a reward of another food that oftentimes isn't nutritious. So I just think it behooves us all as parents to think about that and to perhaps, change the way we're doing things. If we're using food rewards a lot to get our kids to behave the way we want them to behave or eat the foods we want them to eat, we need to rethink that. I think there's a role for non-food rewards. I think there's a role for pressure-free praise, for trying foods. I think there's most definitely a motivation to expose our children to lots of different foods and to encourage them to try and to really focus on the trying, not the liking, because I believe over time that if we can cultivate a spirit of trying different foods in our children, then it's more fun, it's less performance-based, and it's got that spirit of, hey, let's give this a shot and see how it goes. Much more positive in my mind to raise children who are confident with trying a lot of different foods. And oh, by the way, as they do that, they learn to like a lot of different foods just because they've tried them. So that's it for today. I hope that if you have a child that you've been using food rewards with, you might think about it in a different light, maybe consider a different way. If you're using food rewards once in a while, it is not the end of the world. But if you're using them on a routine basis every day, and that's the way you're getting your child to eat healthier foods, such as vegetables or whole grains, then I would just ask that you rethink that and perhaps learn to do it a different way. Because in the end, if we're always giving children a food reward for eating what we want them to eat, they don't really learn to like the food that we're trying to get them to eat necessarily, and we aren't really motivating them or teaching them how to be motivated to like a variety of different foods on their own. Remember, you have to like a food to be willing to eat it. And I see this all the time in some of the adults that I meet. They never liked green beans as a child. They still don't like green beans. So really, we're trying, what we should be focused on is helping our child or our children like a variety of all kinds of foods over time. And the key word is like, because if somebody likes something, they will be motivated in and of themselves to seek it out and eat it. Okay, so food rewards, big important topic. If you're doing it at home, let's rethink that. Let's find a different way. Consider using a non-food reward like a sticker chart to incentivize, maybe a bigger reward like a movie on the weekend later on in the week. And remember, it's about helping your children like a variety of foods. And before they like it, they have to taste it. But if we use too many food rewards or too much pressure or too many other tricks to get our children to like or even taste certain foods, that can backfire. And it can backfire in the short term, and it can backfire in the long term. Certainly using food rewards is very effective. You'll see an immediate willingness from most children to eat what you want them to eat. But is that what you're cultivating for the long run? And so just think about that. The long-term relationship with food, the long-term eating habits, and the long-term food preferences are really what we're trying to work on and cultivate in our children. You'll be able to find the show notes today for today's episode over at jillcastle.com/031. That's 031 for episode number 31. If you like the show, please help the Nourished Child podcast grow. You can write a review on iTunes. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Android, Stitcher Radio, Google Play Music, Tuned In, and more. And of course, share the podcast on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Instagram, wherever you hang out. If you haven't joined my newsletter, it comes out every single Monday. You can go to my website, jillcastle.com, and sign up there. I send out tidbits of information, nutrition advice. I always link to an article that I think will help you understand the topic at hand. And I also announce new products, new opportunities, and just fun pieces of information, perhaps even a recipe to help you better feed your family. As always, thanks for joining me today. I'm so very glad you were here. Be sure to give the child in your life, big or small, a loving squeeze today. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the Nourished Child podcast, where the #1 goal is to help you grow a nourished child inside and out.